I learned the hard way that owning heavy equipment in a neighborhood with a homeowners association was like painting a target on my back, but I never expected that same HOA would come crawling back to me when their entire sewer system turned their pristine lawns into a cesspool of raw sewage. My name is Isaac Patterson, and I run a small excavation and landscaping business in Lakewood, Colorado. I had saved up for years to buy my first real piece of equipment, a used but well-maintained Kubota excavator that could handle everything from digging foundation trenches to clearing drainage ditches. The day I brought it home on a flatbed trailer, I felt like I had finally made it. My business was growing, my reputation was solid, and I had the equipment to take on bigger jobs. I lived in the Meadowbrook Hills development, a planned community with about 200 homes, winding streets lined with Bradford pear trees, and an HOA that seemed to have nothing better to do than measure grass height and count how many cars people parked in their driveways. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late April. I had parked my excavator on the street in front of my house because my driveway was already occupied by my truck and trailer, and I needed easy access to load it for a job the next morning. The excavator sat on its tracks, bright yellow against the gray asphalt, completely legal according to city ordinances. Colorado state law was pretty clear about this stuff. As long as the vehicle was registered, properly maintained, and not blocking traffic or violating any municipal codes, it could be parked on a public street. I had done my homework. I was inside making coffee when my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a silver Lexus SUV parked behind my excavator, and standing on my porch was Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone says the word Karen. She was in her mid-50s with that specific hairstyle, short and angled, highlighted in shades that probably had names like champagne blonde and butterscotch. She wore athletic wear that had never seen actual athletics, and she carried a leather-bound planner like it was the Declaration of Independence. "Good morning, Patricia," I said, opening the door before she could ring the bell a second time. "Mr. Patterson, we need to talk about that monstrosity you have parked on our street," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. I glanced over her shoulder at my excavator. "It's parked legally. I checked the city codes." "I don't care about city codes. The Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association has very specific regulations about commercial vehicles and equipment. You're in direct violation of Article 7, Section 3 of our covenants, conditions, and restrictions." I had read through those CCRs when I bought the house 5 years ago, back when I was just starting my business and working out of a pickup truck. Commercial vehicles are permitted as long as they're not being used for business purposes on the property itself. I'm not operating the excavator here. I'm just storing it temporarily before a job. Patricia's face tightened. "Temporarily? That thing has been sitting there for 3 days. 2 days, I corrected. And it'll be gone tomorrow morning when I head out to the job site in Castle Rock. That's not acceptable. The aesthetic standards of this community are what maintain our property values. How do you think it looks to prospective buyers when they drive through and see industrial equipment parked on the street?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone level. "Patricia, I live here. I pay my HOA dues. I keep my lawn mowed and my house painted according to the approved color palette. This excavator is a tool for my business, and it's legally parked on a public street. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over public streets." "Actually, we do. The streets in Meadowbrook Hills are private roads maintained by the HOA. That means we have every right to regulate what can and cannot be parked on them." That made me pause. I had assumed the streets were public, like in most neighborhoods. "I'll need to verify that." "Verify whatever you want. In the meantime, you need to remove that equipment immediately, or the HOA will be forced to take action. Consider this your official warning." She produced a folded letter from her planner and handed it to me. "You have 24 hours to comply." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table and read through the letter. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and cited several sections of the CCRs I had apparently violated. The language was formal and threatening, mentioning fines up to $200 per day and potential legal action if I didn't comply. I pulled out my copy of the CCRs and started reading. The document was over 100 pages long, filled with regulations about everything from fence heights to approved mailbox designs. When I finally found Article 7, Section 3, the language was vague enough to be interpreted multiple ways. I called my lawyer, a guy named Marcus Chen, who had helped me set up my business, LLC. He listened to my situation and asked me to send him photos of the street, the excavator, and copies of the HOA documents. 2 hours later, he called me back. "It's right." "It's a gray area," Marcus said. "The HOA claims the streets are private, but according to county records, they're maintained under a special assessment district that receives public funding for road maintenance. That typically means they're considered public right-of-way, even if the HOA collects fees for upkeep. But challenging this would mean going to court, which could cost you more than just moving the excavator." "So they're bluffing?" "Maybe, or maybe they genuinely believe they have the authority. HOAs can be tricky. They operate in this weird space between private agreements and quasi-governmental authority. My advice? Move the excavator if you can, and if this becomes a pattern, we'll fight it. But for a one-time parking situation, it's probably not worth the hassle." I thanked him and hung up, frustrated but resigned. I called my client in Castle Rock and explained that I would need to head down that afternoon instead of the next morning. He was fine with it, so I spent the next few hours loading the excavator onto my trailer and driving south. The job went well, 3 days of digging out an old septic system and preparing the site for a new one, and I put the HOA issue out of my mind. When I returned to Meadowbrook Hills on Friday evening, I parked my excavator in exactly the same spot on the street. I had another job starting Monday morning, and it made no sense to unload the machine just to load it again in 3 days. Besides, I was annoyed. Patricia's attitude had rubbed me the wrong way, and I had confirmed with the county that the streets were indeed public right-of-way. The HOA maintained them through the special assessment, but that didn't give them the authority to ban legal vehicles. Saturday morning, I woke to another doorbell ring. This time it was not Patricia, but a tow truck idling in front of my house. The driver, a heavy-set man in a greasy ball cap, was standing on my porch with a clipboard. "You Isaac Patterson?" he asked. "Yeah, what's going on?" "I've got an order to tow this excavator. It's been reported as abandoned." "Abandoned? I live right here. That's my equipment." He shrugged. "I just do what the work order says. If you've got a problem, you need to take it up with whoever called it in." "Who called it in?" "Meadowbrook Hills HOA, lady named Patricia Hendricks." I felt my blood pressure rising. "That excavator's not abandoned. It's parked legally, and I'm the owner. You're not towing it." The driver scratched his chin. "Look, man, I get it, but I've got a contract with the HOA. If they say tow it, I tow it. You want to fight about it, that's between you and them. If you hook up to my equipment, I'll call the police and report it as theft." That made him pause. He looked at his clipboard, then at me, then at the excavator. "This ain't worth the headache. I'm going to call my dispatcher." He walked back to his truck and spent a few minutes on his phone. When he came back, he looked relieved. "All right. My boss says we're not touching it unless we get a court order. You should still talk to the HOA, though. They're not going to let this go." After the tow truck left, I called Marcus again. This time, I was ready to fight. He drafted a cease and desist letter and sent it to the HOA, warning them that any further attempts to remove my legally parked equipment would result in legal action. I also filed a complaint with the county about the HOA's claims regarding the streets, and a county administrator confirmed in writing that Meadowbrook Hills streets were public right-of-way, subject to county and state regulations, not HOA restrictions on vehicle type. For a week, things were quiet. Then, I received a notice in the mail about an emergency HOA meeting to discuss ongoing violations of community standards. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse, and all homeowners were encouraged to attend. I marked my calendar. The clubhouse was packed when I arrived. Apparently, Patricia had been busy spreading the word that someone in the neighborhood was thumbing their nose at the HOA rules, and people were curious. I recognized most of the faces, neighbors I had waved to over the years but never really talked to. Patricia sat at a table at the front of the room with 2 other board members, Gerald Hutchins and Linda Beaumont. Gerald was a retired accountant who took everything way too seriously, and Linda was a stay-at-home mom who seemed to go along with whatever Patricia said. Patricia called the meeting to order and went through some standard business, approving minutes and discussing landscaping contracts. Then she got to what she called new business. As many of you know, we have a homeowner who has been repeatedly violating our CCRs by parking commercial equipment on our streets. This is not only unsightly, but it's also a safety hazard and a liability for the association. We've attempted to resolve this matter amicably, but the homeowner has refused to cooperate. I raised my hand. I'd like to respond to that. Patricia looked annoyed. This is not a debate, Mr. Patterson. Actually, HOA meetings are supposed to allow homeowner input. That's Colorado law. Murmurs went through the crowd. Gerald leaned over and whispered something to Patricia, who pursed her lips. Fine, you have 2 minutes. I stood up and turned to address the room. My name is Isaac Patterson, and I run an excavation business. The equipment Patricia is talking about is a small excavator that I use for my work. I park it on the street in front of my house occasionally when I have jobs scheduled. It's legally registered, insured, and parked in accordance with county and state regulations. The HOA sent me a letter claiming they have the authority to ban it, but I've confirmed with the county that our streets are public right-of-way. The HOA does not have the legal authority to restrict what types of vehicles can park here as long as they comply with traffic laws. That's not true, Patricia interrupted. Our CCRs clearly state, Your CCRs can't override state law, I said, raising my voice slightly. I've consulted with an attorney, and I've sent the HOA a cease and desist letter. If you continue to harass me or attempt to tow my equipment without legal authority, I will sue the association for damages and legal fees. The room erupted in conversation. Some people seemed to be on my side, nodding and whispering to their neighbors. Others looked scandalized, as if I had just announced I was starting a strip club in my garage. Patricia banged a gavel on the table. Order! This is exactly the kind of attitude that threatens the harmony of our community. Mr. Patterson, if you refuse to comply with the rules that every other homeowner follows, then the board will have no choice but to impose fines and pursue legal remedies. Go ahead, I said. I'll see you in court. The meeting devolved from there. Several homeowners stood up to voice their opinions, some supporting the HOA's right to maintain standards, others questioning whether the board was overstepping its authority. One guy, a contractor who lived a few streets over, pointed out that he parked his work van on the street all the time, and nobody had ever complained about it. Patricia insisted that a van was different from an excavator, but she couldn't articulate why exactly. Eventually, the meeting ended without any resolution. Patricia announced that the board would consult with the HOA's attorney and take appropriate action. I left feeling both vindicated and exhausted. I had moved to Meadowbrook Hills because it seemed like a nice, quiet place to raise a family someday, not because I wanted to spend my evenings arguing about parking. Over the next few weeks, I continued parking my excavator on the street whenever I had jobs lined up. Patricia would drive by and glare at me, sometimes taking photos with her phone, but she didn't send any more letters or tow trucks. I assumed she had talked to the HOA's lawyer and realized they didn't have a leg to stand on. Then, in mid-June, everything changed. It started with a smell. I was working in my garage on a Saturday afternoon when I noticed a faint odor of sewage. At first, I thought maybe a neighborhood dog had left a present somewhere nearby, but the smell got worse as the day went on. By evening, I could see water pooling in the street a few houses down from mine. It was dark and oily looking, and the smell was unmistakable. I walked down the street to investigate and found several neighbors standing around, looking concerned. The water was coming from a storm drain, bubbling up and spreading across the pavement. One of the neighbors, a guy named Tom Rollins, was on his phone with the county utilities department. They're saying it's not their problem, Tom said, frustrated. The sewer lines in this neighborhood are privately maintained by the HOA. That was news to me. I had always assumed the county handled sewage, but apparently Meadowbrook Hills had its own system that tied into the county main at the edge of the development. The HOA was responsible for maintaining everything within the neighborhood boundaries. By Sunday morning, the situation had escalated. The pooling water had spread to cover half the street, and the smell was unbearable. More concerning, several houses on that block were reporting sewage backing up into their toilets and bathtubs. Patricia sent out an emergency email to all homeowners, explaining that there was a problem with the main sewer line and that a contractor had been called to assess the situation. The contractor showed up Monday morning with a camera system to inspect the line. I happened to be loading my excavator for a job when he arrived, so I stopped to watch. He fed a long cable with a camera on the end into the sewer access point and spent about an hour reviewing the footage on a laptop in his van. When he finished, he walked over to where Patricia was standing with Gerald and Linda, arms crossed, looking impatient. I was close enough to overhear their conversation. "It's bad," the contractor said, pulling up footage on a tablet to show them. "You've got a complete collapse about 60 feet down from this access point. The pipe is old clay tile, probably original to when the development was built in the 80s. It's just disintegrated. You're looking at a full replacement of at least a 100-foot section, maybe more depending on what we find when we dig it up." "How much will that cost?" Patricia asked. "For a job this size, probably between $80,000 and $100,000, maybe more if we hit complications. And you need it done fast because right now raw sewage is backing up into people's homes." Patricia's face went pale. "We don't have that kind of money in the reserve fund." "Then you'll need to do a special assessment or take out a loan. But first, you need to hire someone to do the work. I can get you a quote by tomorrow, but I'm booked out for at least 3 weeks. You'll need to find someone who can start sooner." Patricia's eyes darted around, and for a brief moment, they landed on me, standing next to my excavator. I saw the gears turning in her head, but she looked away quickly and ushered the contractor toward her car to talk privately. Over the next 2 days, the situation got worse. More homes reported sewage backups, and the pooling water in the street turned into a full-on swamp. The smell was so bad that people were keeping their windows closed despite the summer heat. Patricia sent out another email saying the HOA was working on securing a contractor and that emergency repairs would begin as soon as possible. On Wednesday, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Patricia standing there, and the expression on her face was very different from the last time she had shown up. She looked tired and stressed, and she was not holding her planner like a weapon. "Mr. Patterson, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice tight. "About what?" "About hiring you to fix the sewer line." I almost laughed. "You're kidding." "I'm not. We've called every excavation company in the area, and nobody can start for at least 2 weeks. People are living with sewage in their homes. We need someone who can start immediately, and you have the equipment and the expertise. Patricia, you tried to have my excavator towed. You threatened to fine me. You called an emergency HOA meeting to complain about me. And now you want to hire me?" She looked down at her feet. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was trying to enforce what I thought were the rules, but I understand now that I was wrong. Please, we're desperate. I'm willing to pay your full rate, whatever it is." I stared at her, trying to decide if this was some kind of trap. "Let me get this straight. You spent weeks harassing me about parking my excavator on the street, and now you want me to use that same excavator to dig up the street and fix your sewer line." "Yes? And you're asking me this as a favor?" "I'm asking you as a business proposal. We need a contractor and you're available. This is a legitimate job and we'll pay you fairly. I'm not asking you to do it for free." I crossed my arms. "I'm going to need a few things before I even consider this. First, I want a written apology from the HOA for the harassment. Second, I want a permanent easement allowing me to park my equipment on the street whenever I need to without any interference from the HOA. Third, I want a contract for this job that includes payment terms in writing with a 50% deposit up front." Patricia hesitated, but only for a moment. "I'll need to get board approval for the easement, but I think I can make that happen. The apology and the contract I can do right now. Then come back when you have all three, and we'll talk." She left, and I called Marcus to give him a heads up. He thought it was hilarious. "You've got them over a barrel," he said. "Make sure that contract is airtight, and get everything about the parking easement in writing, signed by the entire board." Patricia returned that evening with Gerald and Linda. They had printed out a formal letter of apology on HOA letterhead, admitting that their previous actions regarding my excavator had been based on a misunderstanding of the law and that they regretted any inconvenience caused. They also had a draft of an amended CCR section that explicitly allowed me to park commercial equipment on the street in front of my property, subject to the same rules as any other vehicle. It still needed to be voted on by the full board and filed with the county, but all three of them signed a preliminary agreement to that effect. For the contract, I drew up a detailed proposal outlining the scope of work, the timeline, and the cost. Based on what the other contractor had said, I estimated the job at $90,000, which included excavation, removal of the old pipe, installation of new PVC sewer line, backfill, and repaving the street. I built in a contingency for unexpected issues, which was standard for this kind of work. I also included a payment schedule, 50% up front, 25% at the halfway point, and 25% upon completion. Patricia balked at the upfront deposit. That's $45,000. The HOA doesn't have that much available without doing a special assessment. Then do a special assessment, or take out a loan. But I'm not starting work without that deposit. I've seen too many clients try to back out of paying after the job is done. Gerald spoke up. We can call an emergency board meeting and approve a loan against the reserve fund. It'll take a day or two to process, but we can have the money by Friday. Fine, I said. I'll start on Monday, assuming the deposit clears. We all signed the contract, and they left. I sat on my couch that night with a beer, marveling at how quickly things had flipped. A month ago, Patricia had been threatening to fine me. Now, she was writing me a check for $45,000. The deposit cleared Friday afternoon, and I spent the weekend preparing for the job. I rented a larger excavator than my own, a 20-ton machine that could handle the deep digging required to reach the sewer main. I also hired 2 guys I had worked with before, Carlos and Jimmy, to help with the manual labor. We would need to shore up the trench as we dug, remove the broken pipe, and carefully install the new sections without damaging the rest of the system. Monday morning, we started work at 7. I'd pulled the permits from the county over the weekend, which had been a minor headache because the HOA had never properly documented the original sewer system. The county inspector had to come out and verify the location of the main line before approving the excavation permit. But once that was done, we were good to go. The first day was all about digging. We marked out the area where the collapse had occurred, set up safety barriers and cones, and started removing asphalt. The excavator made quick work of the pavement, and within a few hours we had a trench about 4 feet deep and 10 feet long. The smell was awful, exactly as bad as I had expected, and we all wore respirators to keep from gagging. By midday, we had exposed the old clay pipe. The contractor had been right. It was completely disintegrated in several places, crumbled into chunks that were barely holding together. Roots from a nearby tree had infiltrated the pipe, creating a blockage that had caused pressure to build up until the whole thing gave way. It was a textbook example of deferred maintenance. Patricia stopped by around lunchtime to check on our progress. She stood at the edge of the trench, holding a handkerchief over her nose. "How's it going?" "About as expected," I said, climbing out of the trench. "The pipe is worse than the camera showed. We're going to need to replace at least 150 feet, maybe more. I'll know better once we dig further." "Will that cost more?" "Probably. I built in some contingency, but if we have to go beyond 150 feet, yeah, it'll add to the cost. I'll keep you updated." She nodded, looking miserable. "Thank you for doing this. I know I wasn't kind to you before, and I appreciate you being professional about it." I shrugged. "It's business, but I do expect that parking easement to go through." "It will. The board already voted to approve it. We're filing the paperwork with the county this week." Over the next several days, we made steady progress. The trench grew longer as we uncovered more sections of broken pipe. In some places, the pipe had completely collapsed, leaving voids that had filled with dirt and sewage. We had to excavate carefully to avoid destabilizing the surrounding soil, using trench boxes to shore up the walls and prevent cave-ins. By Thursday, we had removed all of the old pipe and were ready to start installing the new PVC sections. This was the most critical part of the job because everything had to be aligned perfectly to ensure proper flow. Carlos and Jimmy worked in the trench, fitting the sections together and sealing the joints, while I operated the excavator to lower the pipe into place. As we worked, several neighbors came by to watch. Most of them were friendly and appreciative, thanking me for working quickly to get their sewage system back online. A few made jokes about Patricia having to eat crow and hire the guy she had tried to ban from the neighborhood. One woman, an older lady named Margaret, brought us lemonade and cookies, which was a nice gesture even if we were too dirty to enjoy them properly. By the end of the week, we had the new pipe installed and the trench backfilled. The final step was repaving the street, which required a paving contractor. I called a guy I knew and got him scheduled for the following Tuesday. In the meantime, we compacted the dirt and graded it so the street was passable, then set up temporary plates over the trench to allow cars to drive across. The county inspector came out on Monday to review the work and approve the installation. He climbed down into the trench, checked the joints in the slope, and ran water through the system to make sure everything was flowing properly. After about an hour, he signed off on the permit and told me we were good to go. The paving crew finished on Tuesday, laying down fresh asphalt and restriping the street. By Wednesday, the job was complete. The street looked better than it had before the collapse, the smell was gone, and the homeowners who had been dealing with sewage backups finally had functional plumbing again. I sent Patricia an invoice for the final payment, which included the additional cost for the extra 50 feet of pipe we had replaced. The total came to $105,000, which was within the range I had estimated. She called me the next day, sounding stressed but resigned. The board approved the final payment. We had to do a special assessment to cover the overage, which is going to make us very unpopular with the homeowners, but we don't have a choice. The check will be ready by Friday. Sounds good. Just let me know when I can pick it up. Isaac, I want to thank you again. You saved us. If you hadn't been available, we would have been dealing with this for weeks and the damage would have been much worse. You're welcome. And for the record, this is why people who work in construction and trades need to park equipment sometimes. It's not about being an eyesore. It's about being ready when something like this happens. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I understand that now. I'm sorry I didn't see it before. I picked up the final check on Friday, deposited it, and paid Carlos and Jimmy for their work. After expenses, I cleared a decent profit, enough to put a down payment on a second excavator and expand my business. More importantly, I had a signed agreement from the HOA allowing me to park my equipment without harassment, and I had earned the respect of my neighbors. But the story did not end there. About 2 weeks after the job was finished, I received a call from Tom Rollins, the neighbor who had been one of the first to notice the sewage problem. He sounded upset. Isaac, have you been following the HOA's finances? Not really. Why? Because something doesn't add up. Patricia sent out a notice about the special assessment to cover the sewer repair, and the amount she's charging everyone is way more than what you invoiced. That got my attention. How much more? She's saying the total cost was $150,000, and she's dividing that among all the homeowners. That's an extra $45,000 that's unaccounted for. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Are you sure? Positive. I've got the invoice you gave her, and I've got the special assessment notice. The numbers don't match. I told Tom I would look into it and called Marcus. He advised me to request a formal accounting from the HOA, which was my right as a homeowner. I sent an email to Patricia that afternoon, politely asking for a breakdown of all costs related to the sewer repair, including any additional expenses beyond my invoice. She responded 2 days later with a vague email saying that the total cost included engineering studies, permit fees, and administrative overhead. She attached a summary spreadsheet, but it was not itemized in any detail. The engineering studies line item was listed at $20,000, and administrative fees were another $15,000. There were also several smaller charges for things like emergency notifications and legal consultations. I forwarded the email to Marcus, who took one look at it and said it smelled like fraud. Engineering studies for a sewer repair like this should cost maybe $5,000, tops, he said, and administrative fees for an HOA are usually baked into the monthly dues, not charged separately for a specific project. This looks like she's inflating the costs to cover something else. Like what? I don't know. Maybe the HOA is in financial trouble and she's using the special assessment to plug holes in the budget. Or maybe she's pocketing the money. Either way, this is worth investigating. I reached out to Tom and a few other neighbors, and we decided to request a full audit of the HOA's finances. Colorado law allows homeowners to petition for an audit if a certain percentage of residents sign on, and we easily gathered enough signatures. We submitted the petition to the board, and Patricia was furious. She sent out an email accusing us of harassment and claiming that the audit was a waste of money that would only increase costs for everyone. But the law was on our side, and the board had no choice but to comply. They hired an independent accounting firm to review the HOA's books, and the results came back 6 weeks later. The audit revealed that Patricia had been embezzling money from the HOA for over 2 years. She had set up a fake vendor account under a shell company and had been writing checks to herself for bogus services like landscaping consultations and community improvements. The total amount she had stolen was over $70,000, and she had used the inflated special assessment for the sewer repair to cover her tracks, hoping nobody would notice the discrepancies. The audit also revealed that the HOA's reserve fund, which was supposed to have over $200,000 in it, had been depleted to less than $50,000. Patricia had been siphoning money for months, and the sewer collapse had been the crisis that finally exposed her. The board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. They also filed a police report, and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office opened an investigation. Within a week, Patricia was arrested and charged with theft, embezzlement, and fraud. The local news picked up the story, and it became a minor scandal in Lakewood. The headline in the Denver Post read, "HOA President Arrested for Embezzling Funds, Caught After Sewer Collapse." The HOA hired a lawyer to pursue restitution, and Patricia eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay back the full amount she had stolen, plus interest and legal fees. Her husband, who claimed he had no idea what she had been doing, ended up selling their house in Meadowbrook Hills to cover the restitution. They moved away before the trial was even over, and nobody in the neighborhood heard from them again. The HOA elected a new board, and one of the first things they did was issue a formal apology to me for Patricia's behavior. They also expanded the parking easement to allow any homeowner to park work vehicles or equipment on the street, as long as it did not block traffic or violate safety regulations. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. In the months that followed, I became more involved in the HOA, attending meetings and serving on the landscaping committee. I wanted to make sure that the association was run transparently and that homeowners had a say in decisions that affected them. It was not the role I had ever imagined for myself, but it felt important. My business continued to grow, and I took on more jobs around the Denver area. The sewer repair in Meadowbrook Hills became a kind of calling card. People heard the story and wanted to hire the guy who had stood up to the HOA and then saved the neighborhood from a sewage disaster. I even got a few calls from other HOAs asking if I could help with their infrastructure problems, which was both ironic and satisfying. One afternoon in late September, I was working in my garage when I saw a moving truck pull up to Patricia's old house. A young couple got out, looking excited and a little overwhelmed. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Isaac. I live a few houses down. Welcome to the neighborhood." The guy shook my hand. "Thanks, I'm David, and this is my wife, Emily. We just closed on the house yesterday." "Great time to buy. The HOA just went through some changes, and things are a lot more reasonable now." Emily laughed. "We heard about that. Our realtor told us the whole story about the president getting arrested. It's kind of crazy." "Yeah, it was a wild few months, but the neighborhood is solid, and the people are good. If you ever need anything, just knock on my door." As I walked back to my house, I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. A year ago, I'd been fighting just to park my excavator on the street. Now, I was welcoming new neighbors and helping to shape the future of the HOA. It was not the path I had expected, but it felt right. That evening, I sat on my porch with a beer and watched the sun set over the mountains. The street was quiet and my excavator was parked right where it belonged, ready for the next job. I had learned a lot about standing up for what was right, even when it was inconvenient, and about how quickly things could change when people were held accountable. The sewer collapse had been a disaster, but it had also been a turning point. It had exposed corruption, brought the community together, and ultimately made Meadowbrook Hills a better place to live. And it had reminded me that sometimes the thing people complain about the most is the thing they end up needing the most. I finished my beer and went inside, feeling grateful for the way things had turned out. The HOA had tried to ban my excavator from the road, but in the end, that same excavator had saved them. And Patricia Hendricks, the woman who had made my life difficult for weeks, was now serving time for her crimes. Justice had been served, and the neighborhood was moving forward. Life in Meadowbrook Hills was finally peaceful again, and I was content to keep it that way. My business was thriving, my relationship with the HOA was solid, and I had earned the trust and respect of my neighbors. It was everything I had hoped for when I moved here, and more. As I closed the garage door for the night, I glanced at my excavator one more time. It sat there, yellow and sturdy, a symbol of hard work and perseverance. It had been the source of so much conflict, but also the solution to a crisis. And now, thanks to a hard-won easement and a new HOA board, it could stay right where it was, ready for whatever came next. The irony was not lost on me. Patricia had spent so much energy trying to get rid of my excavator, convinced it was ruining the neighborhood's image. But when the sewer main collapsed and raw sewage flooded the streets, that same piece of equipment became the most valuable thing in Meadowbrook Hills. She had been forced to swallow her pride and ask for my help, and I had made sure she paid a fair price for it, both literally and figuratively. The special assessment had been a source of anger for many homeowners, who resented having to pay hundreds or even thousands of dollars to cover the emergency repair. But once the audit revealed Patricia's embezzlement, that anger shifted. People realized they had been lied to and stolen from, and they demanded accountability. The district attorney's office took the case seriously, and Patricia's guilty plea had been a relief to everyone involved. I heard through the grapevine that Patricia's defense attorney had tried to argue that she was under financial stress and had made poor decisions, but the judge was not sympathetic. Embezzling $70,000 from a homeowners association was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated scheme that had gone on for years, and it had put the financial stability of the entire community at risk. The restitution order meant that Patricia would be paying back the money for the rest of her life, even after she got out of prison. Her husband had divorced her shortly after the sentencing, and she had lost everything: her home, her reputation, and her freedom. It was a harsh outcome, but it was hard to feel sorry for someone who had stolen from her neighbors and then tried to cover it up by inflating the cost of an emergency repair. The new HOA board was a breath of fresh air. The president, a retired engineer named Robert Sinclair, was calm, methodical, and transparent. He held monthly meetings where homeowners could voice concerns and ask questions, and he made sure that all financial records were available for anyone to review. The atmosphere at meetings was completely different, less adversarial, and more collaborative. One of the first things Robert did was commission a full inspection of the neighborhood's infrastructure. The sewer collapse had been a wake-up call, and he wanted to make sure there were not other problems lurking beneath the surface. The inspection revealed that several storm drains needed to be cleared and that a section of the water main was starting to corrode, but nothing as catastrophic as the sewer line. The board approved a maintenance plan and started setting aside money in the reserve fund to address these issues before they became emergencies. I was asked to bid on some of the repair work, and I ended up doing several smaller jobs for the HOA over the next year. It was steady work, and it felt good to contribute to the community in a tangible way. My relationship with the board and the other homeowners was strong, and I no longer felt like I was fighting an uphill battle every time I needed to park my equipment. In the spring of the following year, the HOA organized a community cleanup day, and I volunteered to help. We spent the morning picking up litter, trimming overgrown bushes, and touching up the paint on the clubhouse. It was the kind of thing Patricia would have micromanaged to death, insisting on specific colors and schedules, but Robert just let people do what needed to be done. It was refreshing. During the lunch break, Tom Rollins pulled me aside. "You know, if it was not for you, none of this would have happened. Patricia would still be stealing, and the HOA would still be a mess." I shrugged. I just wanted to park my excavator. Everything else just sort of happened. "Maybe, but you stood up for yourself when a lot of people would have just given in. And when the sewer collapsed, you could have told Patricia to go to hell, but you did not. You did the job, and you did it right. That says a lot about your character." It was a kind thing to say, and it stuck with me. I had not set out to be a hero or to take down a corrupt HOA president. I had just been trying to run my business and live my life. But sometimes, doing the right thing means standing up to people who abuse their power, even when it is uncomfortable or inconvenient. As the months went by, life in Meadowbrook Hills settled into a comfortable rhythm. The neighborhood felt more like a community and less like a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. People looked out for each other, and there was a sense of pride in the improvements we had made together. My business continued to thrive, and I eventually bought that second excavator I had been saving for. I also hired another full-time employee, a young guy named Tyler who was eager to learn the trade. Carlos and Jimmy became regular members of my crew, and we took on bigger and more complex jobs. The reputation I had built in Meadowbrook Hills opened doors all over the Denver metro area, and I was grateful for the opportunities. One evening in late summer, I was sitting on my porch when I saw Robert walking his dog. He waved and came over to chat. "How's business?" he asked. "Busy. I've got jobs lined up through the end of the year." "That's great. Hey, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did last year. The sewer repair, the audit, all of it. You really turned things around for this neighborhood." "I appreciate that, but it was not just me. A lot of people stepped up." "True, but you were the catalyst, and I think people respect that you did not back down when Patricia tried to push you around. It set a good example." We talked for a few more minutes, and then he continued his walk. I sat there, watching the sunset and thinking about how far things had come. A year and a half ago, I'd been fighting just to park my excavator on the street. Now, I was a respected member of the community, and the HOA was functioning the way it should, as a tool to help homeowners, not a weapon to control them. The lesson I took away from the whole experience was simple. Do not let people push you around, especially when you know you are right. Stand up for yourself, even if it is difficult, and do not be afraid to hold people accountable when they abuse their power. And when someone who has wronged you comes asking for help, you have a choice. You can turn them away, or you can rise above it and do what needs to be done. I chose the latter, and it made all the difference. Patricia Hendricks had learned a hard lesson about integrity and consequences. Her attempt to control the neighborhood and enrich herself at the expense of her neighbors had backfired spectacularly. She lost everything, and she would spend years paying for her mistakes. Meanwhile, Meadowbrook Hills had emerged stronger and more united than ever. As for me, I kept doing what I did best, digging holes, fixing problems, and building a business I could be proud of. My excavator, the same piece of equipment that had caused so much controversy, sat in front of my house whenever I needed it to, a reminder of the battles I had fought and won. And every time I drove past the section of street we had repaired, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The sewer main that had collapsed and caused so much chaos was now solid and functional, a testament to the importance of good work and honest dealing. The neighborhood had moved on from the drama, but the memory of what had happened lingered as a cautionary tale. People talked about it sometimes, usually when a new homeowner moved in and asked about the history of the HOA. The story of Patricia's downfall became part of the neighborhood lore, a reminder that no one is above accountability, no matter how much authority they think they have. For me, the experience reinforced something I had always believed, that hard work, honesty, and standing up for what is right will always win in the end. It might take time, and it might be difficult, but justice has a way of prevailing. Patricia had tried to use her position to bully me, but in the end, it was her own corruption that brought her down. And the excavator she had tried so hard to ban from the road became the very tool that saved the neighborhood she had nearly destroyed. Life went on, and I continued to grow my business and contribute to my community. The HOA was no longer a source of stress or conflict, but a functional organization that served the needs of homeowners. And I had earned the respect and trust of my neighbors, not by being confrontational or combative, but by doing my job well and standing up for what was right. As I reflect on everything that happened, I realize that the whole ordeal was a turning point in my life. It taught me the importance of resilience, integrity, and community. It showed me that even when people try to tear you down, you can rise above it and come out stronger. And it reminded me that the things we value most, our reputation, our relationships, our sense of justice, are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The excavator still sits in front of my house sometimes, a bright yellow symbol of perseverance and hard work. And every time I see it, I'm reminded of the journey I took, from being harassed by an overzealous HOA president to becoming a respected member of the community who helped bring justice to those who had been wronged. It is a story I am proud to tell, and a reminder that sometimes the things people try to take away from you are the things you need most to succeed.